Okay, the time is 4:50 PM, and this is October 30th, 2025. Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee meeting of the Fairfax County School Board will now come to order. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. I know it's been busy in terms of facilities and boundaries and all kinds of stuff. We've been running ragged around the county too, at least me as an at-large member. I know we've been all over the place, and I know Ms. Mirren and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser have as well. So thank you to staff for being here and staff for helping facilitate the meeting. We're going to go ahead and dive right into the conversation unless anybody has anything they want to remark on. So seeing and hearing none. The next order of business, agenda item 1.02, educational specifications. So this was a topic of conversation 2 board meetings ago from the dais at our regular school board meeting. And in response to that, I requested that I decided rather to agendize this as a topic of conversation. And I don't want to delve too deep into this. The purpose of this was to determine whether or not we wanted to do a full school board work session on the ed specs. The document that was circulated in response to that board conversation has been posted online. It's titled FCPS Educational Specifications Summary. It's a 2-pager. So what I want to do is kind of propose that we approach this in the Jeff Bezos fashion of tackling meetings, which let's all take a couple of minutes to thumb through that document, jot down any questions that we have, and then we'll ask those questions here, and then we'll make a determination after a conversation as to whether or not we want to move to a full work session to have a board presentation on ed specs. So let's take a couple of minutes just to kind of read through this 2-pager, and then we'll have a chat and go from there. Does that work? Sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, and we're back. I have a list of a couple of questions, but I want to open the floor for conversation if anybody would like to go first. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, or
I have several questions. First, I think on the topic of whether we have a work session or not, and I think I'd want a better understanding of what would the purpose of the work session be and what would we want as potential outcomes? Is it just to give, is it informational? Is it to give feedback? Is it to make changes? Like that's would be one of my questions. And if it's informational or maybe to give feedback, maybe I would recommend perhaps to be combined with other sort of hot topics in facilities. I know we've talked about different procurement methodology, different design build method, so I think instead of, my worry is you do one on ed specs and you do something on procurement, it just ends up being too many different work sessions, right? So I would recommend a facilities work session that's informational to help the board better understand what goes into some of these things would be my suggestion, as opposed to one on the ed specs in particular. And perhaps I would recommend a CPDC chair. And maybe this committee could talk about it more, but you could even maybe do a survey to staff or talk to staff about what kind of topics maybe would staff recommend that it would be helpful for the board to know more as we go on to the community. Because I will say, as one board member, I do think there are a variety of areas of facilities that we could learn more about that would help us in like our PTA and community meetings, but I don't always even know what those topics should and shouldn't be. So perhaps I would ask you as chair to work with staff to kind of flesh out a possible list of topics for this committee to discuss if we were to do a facilities work session. So that's kind of an overarching comment on that. On 8230, the policy, 8130, excuse me, and then the regulation, I think this, if we do this work session, it may behoove us to then send the policy to governance. One of the things I noticed missing in this policy is there's no sort of value statement around ed specs. One of the things that the previous board did is we required new construction to have outdoor learning spaces. Ms. Marin, you may remember we were on the board together when we did, which I think is great. But that was clearly a value statement of the value and the data and research behind outdoor education. But the policy itself just says that the job of the division superintendent is to develop these ed specs and the new construction shall be planned in accordance with. But it doesn't really say like an overarching value or introduction that would help then guide the superintendent in what the board's, when I think of setting policy, like what direction, I don't want to get involved in the operations and the minutia of ed specs, but what sort of overall, like, are we going to look at from an equity lens, for example? Are we going to look from a best practices in educational, the outdoor learning was something the board brought to facilities. So I think that might behoove us in that conversation on facilities. Do we want to look at that that policy to just kind of give a value statement is what I noticed. The other thing, I think there's some inconsistencies in the regulation itself that jumped out at me. The regulation requires that the instructional services department shall develop the ed specs and in cooperation with facilities, transportation, IT, et cetera, shall meet to review. But the policy says the ed specs belongs to the superintendent instructional special services and facilities, but special services gets left out in the regulation, which is a huge problem because that's special services is where special education lies. So I think the higher priority is I would recommend the regulations say the chief academic officer or department because the chief academic officer oversees both special services and instructional. But I think there's a leaving off of a very important department from the policy to the regulation that is more urgent to be addressed. Now, the regulation belongs to the superintendent, so I'm leaving that to you to take a look at, but I think it should be updated to include that. Those are the three things that jumped out at me.
okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so let's go to Ms. Mirren, and then I'll respond to your comments after Ms. Mirren.
Great. I really appreciate what you said, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I was thinking very narrowly about ed specs, and as I said to our chair, we have so much going on with facilities. I couldn't imagine starting this. I asked at the dais, and now I kind of want to walk that back because it's really not something I at all want to delve into. And of course, you remember from the governance committee, so, our governance committee just put forth a very big policy to help move our procurement options, expand that and be more effective. But as you know, from our motion, like in early 24, the governance committee is yet to go through that whole analysis, and I have the list, and that is something that the governance committee has waiting in the wings. So absolutely, we should be looking at policy 8240, but I think it's got to happen. I don't even know if it's on that list. I could pull it up real quick, but, oh, okay, 8120. But here's the thing, there's so many policies that need review. I find sometimes I get to one step and then I'm like, oh wait, that's not reviewed, so I gotta go to a different thing. So I guess the bottom line is absolutely we need to review that policy. I have been asking for regular work sessions about facilities, so I so appreciate you raising that, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, especially given everything that's I mean, I think I've seen Mr. Gordon every day and his team, and last week as well, given our meeting this morning with the county that we'll talk about, and boundaries. We absolutely need a meeting, and we could certainly put all these things on there. Again, I really don't think ed specs is where to start, because let's do the policy, and maybe that's, you know, let's look at it as chunked together, I think, as we can. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, and I agree with you, like we made that whole list with our motion right in 24, and I'm glad you brought that up, Ms. Marin, with all the different policies. I would say, looking at this policy, what I recommended is probably a nice to have, but I think it's not needed for this policy per se to then delve a little more into facilities in general. And I do actually think a work session on facilities, I don't know, I mean, I would defer to the chair, you know, and vice chair of the school board around timing, but I think in conjunction with our CIP work makes a lot of sense, because we're focusing on facilities, we're focusing on the CIP. And I just think having that knowledge basis of what is an ed spec, what goes into it, there's a committee that reviews it every year. You know, and so I think who's on that committee, and perhaps through that conversation, some values around what we're looking for in general in our school spaces could come out. And so I think without having to redo the policy, having a chance for the board to sort of give some feedback on what we would like to see, or we're thinking around facilities, and having the staff be able to share with us, here's the things that we consider when we're designing a school, here's the things that we consider in looking at spaces, and here's maybe even some of the challenges, right? I know our previous board talked a lot about, you know, quiet rooms and sensory rooms and all of these things, and so it'd be helpful, I think, as we're, you know, brainstorming some of these things, to hear from the staff, like, here's some of our challenges in our buildings, to including some of these other spaces. So I just think an overarching knowledge facilities conversation, and we could talk about maybe what the different topics. I do think ed specs could be a topic amongst that, you know, just to kind of, maybe just even a high level, here's what the ed specs are, here's the kinds of things we think about, just for the staff to have an idea. That way, when staff are bringing us something, they've already kind of gotten a vague, but a big conversation with the board, and kind of know how the board thinks on this. And the board has a better understanding of what the staff is doing, to maybe help prevent, you know, some like, hey, well, what is this, and why are you doing this? When we have just the sort of common core foundational knowledge together. That's what I was thinking is when I talk about that.
No, I agree. So I did have some technical questions. So before we get into that, so I guess from staff's perspective, and these may be topics for the work session that we will probably schedule at the first of the year. What I'd like to understand more is on the ed specs in particular, what is the board's role, if any, versus operational staff role? Because I know this is a very technical document. I know the master specifications are even a more technical document. So operating within that framework, where would staff and where would your division kind of see, if any, the board having a hand in the ed specs?
Yeah, so looking at the two documents, ed specs versus master specs. You know, master specs are more about how you're building something, construction requirement, materials, maybe standards for testing and requirements of materials. The ed specs are more of like a design guide. You're handing them, so, you know, at CM at risk. CM at risk position, when you're, you know, at 60%, you're looking to get a guaranteed maximum price. So you would hand, you know, at some point you would hand that, even in the design build, but CM at risk, you'd hand that as a bridging document, right? So CM at risk, we in theory have more control as the owner versus design build. You're handing that over, and they're using that to basically as a template to help design kind of the footprint. Because we generally, you would have classes or standard size, 700, 800 square feet of standards. That gives them, helps build a model, a footprint to build something out. So I think input from from you all could be, hey, we have X budget, right? We don't have enough money to build out our current requirements. Do we, if we say in our ed specs, we want 800 square feet per class space, is that reasonable? Does, could we, is there a possibility of downsizing some of those square footages to maybe get more bang out of the buck? That might be guidance that we're looking from.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so basically the ed spec is the map, and the master specs are how you get through that map. Is
Yeah.
that kind of a fair way of?
Yeah, so the ed specs are going to help develop and build the program, build that footprint, and the master specs are going to tell you how to do it.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. That makes sense. Go ahead. So, and then my other question is, within the, and I think I know the answer to this, within the ed specs, if the board were to look at ed specs, and I think the way Ms. Sizemore-Heiser kind of set up this process is we look at the policy that drives the regulation that then drives ed specs and master specs. So if the board were to at some point review the policy, which I presume is 8120, that would then, to make it more of a values guide, that would then have more of a trickle-down effect through the regulation and then through the specs, both ed and master. So perhaps that's the way to go about reviewing this instead of, what I don't want to do is open up a technical document to the, correct.
You're talking, pages, one verse to another, right? A lot of stuff. It would be, I think, probably impossible to review at your level the master specs.
Yeah, master specs is, and for the folks watching at home, master spec, just me looking at it, which is all available online, by the way, for folks that want to go look at it. It's thousands of pages of very technical construction documents. So I do like the suggestion that that maybe the governance committee, and, Ms. Mears is the chair of that committee, when it's appropriate, could put 8120 on their agenda to take a fresh look at. And I also like the idea of folding this into a broader conversation on facilities versus a standalone work session on ed specs. So I guess without objection, I will work with the school board chair to schedule a work session on facilities overall. And I think one of the other items that was not on the agenda, but that could probably be the driving point of that conversation, is the facility condition assessment that I know we're barreling towards very rapidly. Do you? That would be a good topic. Yeah. So I was going to ask that question. Do we have an update on the FCA procurement?
We're still with finance and legal. So we're ready to go. We're just waiting for approval to go forward, to get a notice to proceed from legal and from finance.
Do we know about how long that's going to sit with them?
I don't, but I'll take that as a due out.
Okay. Yeah,
I was expecting it to have been complete by now, but.
Right. Yeah, I thought late October was kind of our working,
Yeah.
so what I'll do is I'll work with the chair to figure out a work session. I'll use the timeline of facility condition assessment procurement to kind of drive that conversation, and then we'll figure out a couple other topics to fold into there. It will more than likely be after the first of the year at this point.
Just a clarifying question, if I could. So on the facility work session, is it just design, planning, programming, or is it also the O&M piece of it as well? Is it full, everything we do?
So I think the facility, an update on the FCA procurement and the timeline for that is definitely going to be a topic of conversation. I would want to have a conversation around whether or not the full board wants to, and what the timeline would be to address the 8120 policy with governance. Ed specs, the ed spec policy. So instead of this commission, so instead of CPDC today deciding we're just going to send ed spec for review, we're going to have a full board conversation about that then. So, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
So, sorry, what I would recommend, to be honest, in terms of the topics for this facilities work session, is maybe the three of us or this committee can brainstorm, and then once, maybe even today, once we brainstorm, I would recommend, Mr. McDaniel, you as chair, to talk to staff about what they think makes sense. And I think what we should start with, if my suggestion, is what's the purpose of this work session? Because once we get the purpose of the work session, then we can figure out the topics. But if we're looking at topics without knowing, like, what's the goal, I guess, more than the purpose? Like, what is the goal of the work session? And if I may, I would suggest that I think the goal of the work session is building greater understanding with the board and the community around some of the bigger topics that go into our facilities work, right? That may have impacts on our school construction, renovation, and maintenance. So off the top of my head, like some of the things I could think about is I think the 2232 process would be important to talk about. Yeah. Yeah, I was on the I was the planning commission liaison the last 2 years, so I've been, but I'm just throwing out topics. We don't have to do these, right? I think talking a little bit about what the ed specs are and what goes into those and how that changes over time might be important. I think talking about, this is another chance to lay the foundation of the challenges around facilities, like why are we at a 42-year or 45-year renovation cycle, and what are the challenges around that? I mean, this is off the top of my head, but I think if we could talk about the purpose of this meeting, then we could have a better sense of what the topics are.
Yes, Maren.
Yeah, so, I'll be updating in a little bit about our meeting this morning with the Joint Facility Committee, and we talked about all sorts of things this morning, and honestly, whatever work session we have could be directly as a result of that. I mean, I think it would be best, I would love to see this school board have a work session, part of a work session every month focused on something facilities related, because it is our top thing. We're already in November, so it makes sense to roll it into the CIP presentation. But already today, even Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I learned a bunch about how the county's bond program works that I think is critical for the whole school board to know. And so the Board of Supervisors talked about bringing, and actually the 2232, doing a 101 session at our next joint facilities meeting. So there's so many connections here. And I think, as Kyle and I get even deeper in the weeds here, we're really gonna know. And so I just have to say again, I don't think ed specs is where it's at. But also I wanted to mention, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, governance, and Mr. Frisch has been really great about this, bringing really articulate values statements to the policies. So absolutely, and we're really cooking with that. So that's a definite thing. So I just wanted to share those things. Yeah.
Sure, no, that's fine. So my takeaway is I'll work with the board chair to schedule a work session on facilities in general, and then we'll work with members of this committee to kind of figure out what exact topics we want to fold into that. Go ahead.
And for Mr. Gordon's benefit, so this January when the CIP came to the board, I had worked with your predecessor on presenting things in a way for the board to help fill in some of these gaps of knowledge that we had had, and that's where we got this great data about the status of our facilities, and the facility condition assessment came forth. And then in the spring, Mr. Dunn and I helped bring to the board a presentation about the alternative procurement pathways, which is what resulted in the policy being passed just last week. I mean, that was like a really great timeline. But we also had expressed interest in the P3, but even that now seems a tiny bit premature because there's just so much is coming to light, right? And we have Western High School. So anyway, there's lots to do, but just want to share that background history. Yeah.
So if there's no other comments on this agenda item, we can move forward. So again, the takeaway, we'll schedule a work session. Agenda item 1.03. So next order of business, agenda item 1.03, update on policy 8240. I'm not going to read what's in the parentheses. Essentially, and Ms. Mirren, this was in your committee, not to put you on the spot, but essentially what we did is we added, as I've kind of phrased publicly, more tools in our tool belt for how we can go at tackling the challenge of facilities construction and renovation. We added 2 key items, design build, and if I'm not mistaken, CMAR, construction management at risk. and for those watching at home, you can Google it or use AI to kind of figure out what the answer is, or we'll have a quick conversation around that. But long and short, the industry evolves, so these two procurement methods have not been at the disposal of the school system to use for construction and renovation, and now they are. So I don't want to get too in the weeds on the differences of these, but you know, if staff is able to kind of very briefly go over DB and CMAR, then I could open the floor for discussion if there's any questions on that.
Sure. Hey, thank you, sir. So holistically, I think we would still want an option to have traditional design bid build, and CM at risk. So design build and CM at risk, in theory, give you a faster procurement cycle process. Design build is you present bridging documents, and the owner loses somewhat control of it, because you're now relying on an architectural engineering team, you know, collaboration to give you the product. So you give them a project, and they give you a solution, and it's wide open. They'll look at options. You know, they'll determine options for you, then you get to select as an owner, right? With CM at risk, again, in the design build, you generally have one contract. With CM at risk, you'd have two contracts. So you're bringing in a construction manager on board, who's going to be the owner's rep. That's one contract, and about 60% design documents, that construction manager is going to give you an estimate, going to give you a guaranteed maximum price, and then he works, or that individual works to bring on a construction firm, and then they oversee the construction process. And as long as we aren't introducing, as the owner, more scope into the project, they own the risk for up to the guaranteed maximum price. And so I think between the three, design bid build is slowest, design build is fastest, and CM at risk is faster than design bid build, but slightly slower historically than design build. But again, added event, I mean, it's great that we have that ability. The state law has a nuance in there. They think design build is more for complex projects, and so I think in the kind of the three processes, I'd look at high schools, more complex projects, things that might have a longer time sequence, multi-phase projects would be more aligned with a CM at risk type program, and maybe elementary schools, middle schools might be more suited for a design build. So it's kind of a quick synopsis.
Sure. So a question I have, we've added these two different procurement methods. We're obviously retaining all the existing procurement methods. Just so, again, I'm clear, we're still looking at what's going to be across all of our portfolio, all of our projects, whether it's new construction, renovation, whatever it may be, we're still keeping time and cost as the driver of whichever method that we choose.
Correct.
Right. So we're not just saying, okay, well, we're going to go with this method, even if it may cost more. What we're doing is we're adding more options at our disposal to look at the unique needs of each of our facilities.
Correct. And again, the purpose of design build and the CM at risk is in theory, you have less change orders, as long as the owner, we're not introducing additional scope or changes into the process.
Do we have questions? Go ahead, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Do you have criteria that you're developing or have developed on which of the methods that you prefer for any particular project?
So between the two added design build and design bid build, I as a chief would look to use more complex projects for CM at risk.
Okay.
Design build versus CM at risk. I think it's suited for that. It's intended to bring a construction manager in who's maybe seeing things differently than you are, especially for a multi-phase project. So like a high school,
Yeah.
I'd say it's more geared towards a high school,
Okay.
and then more complex, and then design build we could use more towards elementary school, middle schools. But again, we could use CM at risk at all three of them. So,
Is there one that potentially could be more cost-effective than another, or does it just really depend on the type and complexity of the project?
I think, given the fact as the owner, in our history as the owner, we're gonna want the ability to have some control of the project. So I think because of this, the nature of the beast, we're more suited to do CM at risk versus design build. Just because I think we wanna have ownership, have some changes versus design build, you lose, the ability to control the process.
So, and that's like my last question that leads to that. Since the level of control changes, right, depending on which one we use, does that then impact the community engagement process and plan? Because a few years ago, before you were on this board, Mr. McDaniel, the board had reviewed with the OCCR sort of a communications and community engagement plan to go along with construction and build. And so I didn't know if we need to relook at that, and that might be a topic for CPDC to relook at based on the two or the different procurement, building methodology. Because if, let's say we use design build where we lose control earlier in the process of the design and how we may need to shift how we do community engagement to make sure that voice is heard earlier versus if we have more control throughout the project. I believe, and it's been a couple of years, but what OCCR presented to, it was eventually at a work session, but it came through CPDC. The initial process was designed with multiple touch points along the way because we had the ability to make changes, till a certain point, of course, in the construction process. So that may be something we want to look at, because I know one of the concerns around 2232 and the whole 2232 conversation is ensuring robust community engagement. So I think there's a crossover here between the work we're doing on this joint committee around 2232 and the Planning Commission Education Committee around 2232, and the shifting or the multiple options in procurement, and how do we make sure the community engagement piece is as robust but also tailored to each process. So just something I want to put on your radar to talk about.
So, having heard that, ma'am, I would say if we're looking for community engagement throughout the process to provide feedback on design that could lead to changes, then it's more of a CM at risk type scenario. For a more complex, I think you're going to see that more in a complex project like a high school.
May I respond to that? I think what I was trying to really get at is that whatever process we use, we want to make sure that at the times where it's not going to increase our cost per se, or that fits within that process is probably a better way to say it, that there's room for that community engagement. And the initial community engagement process was designed with one, I think that the CMR risk process, not with the new process. So I think there's just room to make sure that whatever that community engagement process that was designed, it was I want to say it was in 2023, or I think it was 23, we had a work session on it, but I can go back and look. And the board never ended up voting on it, but staff had said it was just sort of informational and that they were going to use this method. But I just want to make sure, because I know it might come up into the 2232 conversations.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, that vote was on at the November 20th, 2023 work session. Okay. Yep.
November 20th. I knew it was right after my chair term. It was, so I think because the CPDC was working on it during my chair term, which is 22-23, and then the work session was in November of 23. November, what was the date again, Kevin?
November 28th.
November 28th. So you may just, I just want to bring that on the radar, because I think I don't want to get caught at the end saying, oh, wait a minute, we have a community engagement process that doesn't fit our design and build process. So,
But full acknowledgement, I think in our current construction process, we do allow for, facility updates like we did at Falls Church High School. We do it a spring one and a fall one through the process. Yes, ma'am.
just to make sure that process that you have fits with whatever process you're using for design and build.
Okay, thank you. Is that, no, sure, go ahead.
So I'm so glad you just said that, because I literally was saying to Mr. McDaniel, okay, so at one point we did this community engagement thing because I've seen it in action, and and I'm wondering this kind of challenge with the 2232, that is the state law, which the county, needs to apply, abide by. I remember there was a discussion, and maybe it was when you two were at the Schools Planning Commission earlier this year, that subcommittee, but I thought that, or maybe we had a conversation that our process from November 23 would be applicable. So I was going to try and dig and find it, right? And I just wonder, I think it's even before the next joint committee meeting, saying, hey, we have this process, could this suffice? Because it's much shorter, and I've been to them. I remember we had the web pages, right? So anyway, that's exactly what I think we need to follow up with, yeah, and codify it if it's not. Right, and that could be part of the policy work, is
I just wanted to, I don't want to, like, I feel like I don't want to take, yeah.
No, it's fine. I mean, yes, the 2232, even when I was when I took office last year, we were working towards a template, a boilerplate plan, so to speak, on community engagement. And that way we could kind of work with the Planning Commission and the county side of the house to say, okay, here's how we're generally going to go about community engagement across the entire portfolio, and then just run that process. So it was more predictable, and of course, predictable drives down the timeline. So I think that's going to be the key to this 2232 conversation. And it does need to fit into design build, design bid build, CMAR, whatever process that we use.
Just really quickly, because I was on that planning commission night, we had several meetings. One of the concerns, I think, with the whole 2232 conversation was to ensure that we had that community engagement. It was actually a big part of that conversation when you and I were the planning commission. And then I just came off being the planning commission liaison this last year, because I stayed with Mateo and I before it was caught. And so I've been involved in that process. That was a big concern. And I know staff presented that community engagement process to the planning commission ed committee at least a couple times. So you may want to talk, I know Janice was there presenting, but I don't know whether like Lisa Youngblood Hall's group presented with them, but I know it was presented a couple times, and they were given feedback from the planning commission ed committee as well. So this definitely overlaps with that. And so just, you know, I think we're clear on kind of the path forward and reviewing it and make sure it fits, but I just want to know that it has been presented to them. So this is a process they are aware of. So if we're going to make tweaks to that to fit, you know, design build, all this stuff, we need to make sure that that tweak keeps the robust nature of the community engagement.
Yeah, and Mr. Gordon, I just looked up the link and I sent it to you from that November meeting, and I'm happy to send it to you all to refresh too. So it's, again, I feel like it's just facilities all day long, literally. But this morning, Ms. Heiser, again, and I wish I had brought my slides. Do you have the slides from this morning, Mr. McDaniel? Because we had a slide that had and again, I will email this to you. We just haven't been, it's been going. But we talked about this, the One Fairfax lens, county, schools, parks, right? And so that's wonderful. But can we just have one public process, you know, that's to be expected by the public? Where can we find those efficiencies? So lots coming together. Like, I think it could be really exciting, and we're going to learn a ton through the boundary work. Like, there's just the next few months, I think, have a lot of potential to, you know, pick out the things that work and make all of our policies and processes better. So we all can survive, right? Survive and thrive.
Okay, good. So moving on, agenda item 1.04, next order of business, agenda item 4, role and structure of CPDC and FPAC. So earlier I circulated a two-page document, and again, I kind of want to take the couple of minutes to review this, and we can jot down our questions and have the conversation, but on how we can overhaul the role between this committee and the community advisory committee that's kind of was charged with providing expert input into our capital programming. So we'll take a couple of minutes, look through the two-page document, and then we'll come back with our questions and have a conversation. Okay, we're back. So to give a kind of a Cliff Notes version of this, so the proposal on the table is to restructure the relationship between CPDC, a standing committee of the board, which stands for Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee, effectively the committee that kind of oversees the capital program of the school system, and FPAC, the Facility Planning Advisory Committee, which is the community citizen, community member advisory committee that advises CPDC and the board at large on the capital program. FPAC right now operates kind of separately from CPDC, so what I'm hoping to do by this proposal is to more inject direct expert advice right into CPDC and thus right into the board. And how I'm hoping to accomplish that is instead of having two separate boards, two separate committees that kind of operate on paper together but more so independently, the proposal is to set up a model that another one of our board committees uses, which is the audit committee. So the audit committee has board members with two community members that are experts in the audit field that sit right on that audit committee. So what this proposal does is it puts 3 members of the community that are citizen volunteers, they're experts in their field, right onto CPDC. So the role of the size of CPDC would expand from 4 members of this school board plus the City of Fairfax representative, and we would add 3 experts in the field that are community volunteers to that. So we would go from 5 to 8, and they would all have kind of seats around this big conference table, and we can have live feedback from industry experts pro bono. So with that, I'll kind of open up the floor to conversation, and we'll kick things off. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Well, I thought I could start by just making the motion, and then we could have the conversation about the information. So I would just want to make a motion that I move to direct the chair of the Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee to develop a draft of the proposed changes to FPAC and CPDC and work with the school board chair to bring the matter to the full board for action no later than December 31st, 2025.
There's, okay, in this motion by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser and a second by Ms. Mirren. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, would you like to speak to your motion?
I think you've laid it out very well, and I think it would be very helpful to have direct community feedback in here instead of 2 sort of parallel tracks that might be moving in different directions. I think bring us together, and we already have a model for it with our audit committee. So I really appreciate the work that went into this, and I think it would be very helpful to have us all at the table together. So this makes sense to me.
Okay. Ms. Mirren.
I find this very refreshing and productive, and our FPAC volunteers, they're so dedicated and they've done amazing work. And now that we have that kind of data that I mentioned earlier, we've got this Joint Facilities Committee, we've done a lot of the work that FPAC was intended to help with, and you noted, even the boundary policy really takes over that role. So, the more the board can step up and fulfill its policy responsibilities, the more that we can be efficient, especially with how our very generous volunteers spend their time. I really appreciate that we're going to use the audit committee model. We already know that that works. Because I know in the past it had been a bit time consuming to get our FPAC volunteers approved, so I like it. It certainly would be a lower volume. I would want to be sure, well, hold on a second, let me just check something. Yes, I think this is a great idea. I wonder also about just checking with our public engagement committee of the board, right? Because they are the ones that oversee and help us ensure that we're utilizing and maximizing our advisory committees, right? And similar to when we sunset our Human Resources Advisory Committee, we want to make sure we're doing it in a respectful, thankful way. So just being upfront with our FPAC members and informing each board member, like, this is out there, please contact. And so certainly giving our colleagues guidance on that, I think would be helpful way in advance of something coming to the board.
Yep. So I'll work with the chair of PEC, Ms. St. John Cunning, to make sure that that's communicated fully, and we can do that. Any other questions? No? So, okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, next item, 1.05. I call on Ms. Mirren, the Hunter Mill District Representative, for a report on the Joint Facility Review Committee.
All the way back, and
I do
few
like
hours
to run
ago.
a tight meeting, so you've got 52 minutes.
Oh, wonderful. Well, our meeting this morning ended a little early.
22 minutes.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it was only today. So for the community, this committee, the Joint Facility Review Committee, was established in March by a Board of Supervisors board matter to help, and the mission is to focus on budget efficiencies and savings, or cost efficiencies and savings. And so that finally, we kicked it off today. So it's myself and Mr. McDaniel representing the school board. And on the County Board of Supervisors, it's Supervisor and Vice Chair Kathy Smith and Jimmy Bierman. So we met today, and we do have a meeting link on our board docs that links to that, the meeting documents. There's also a web page now that the county is hosting for this Joint Facility Review Committee, so we can figure out how to make sure that that's available to the public, or just by searching. But we discussed, the county shared some really fascinating and helpful information that I later said this is the kind of stuff the whole board should know, and even training and onboarding, and as we again, kind of re-envision our facilities work and how we're approaching it, but looking at how the county looks at its capital improvement program and how they look at the general obligation bond program. And I learned things like libraries and parks are now in a 6-year cycle for bond funding. I thought it was still 4. The history of what the county has done in terms of contributing to a sinking fund, so that's after the budget is done and their year end, contributing a certain percentage over to cover maintenance costs, and that there had been an expected amount for those maintenance costs, and just over the last few years it hadn't been just maintained, and the school division apparently was looking into doing its own sinking fund. So just knowing how we're doing with our maintenance, and that we have been having to use our general fund money, which is for instruction and the annual operations, using that money for maintenance is really not aligned with what we're trying to do with our annual instruction fund. So I think there's a lot to learn there. And then Mr. McDaniel and I presented our ideas and talking about the nexus of all of this, and that our schools are used 7 days a week, 500,000 additional uses last year, all this really helpful data that we've seen over the last year, and saying, we've got to all be at the table together, and not only the Board of Supervisors and county and the school division, but also the park authority, because we know even during some of our construction renovations now, there are these challenges with everything from parking lot access to athletics access. So really looking at it with that one Fairfax lens was something that was supported. So then we looked at potential topics to have the staff focus on. Lots of staff there, Mr. Gordon and his team, Mr. Muick, our Chief Operations Officer, our CFO as well. So looking at topics, and we explored a number of them. So 2232 was the first one, and there was a lot of agreement that needed to be explored more fully. We talked about MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, and shared that there are a number that are really critical to how we do business that are well due for review, including for school-age childcare, use of facilities. And I know that's a really big topic, especially as I sit on the Fairfax County Athletic Council for our board, and hearing and learning so much again. And then just in general facilities maintenance, because it's become clear through the data throughout this year from our facilities team that while funding might be provided for FCPS managed facilities, FCPS is bearing the costs of maintenance and emergency maintenance and staffing. So a really great example was just recently with the stadium bathrooms. So our school board had approved the building of bathrooms at 15 high schools, long awaited for. And the permitting took a really long time, so that again gets to that 2232 process and some other things we want to improve. But when the facilities were finished at the start of this school year, there was an expectation that the school division was going to clean them, keep them safe, pay for utilities. And that all costs money, and that money is coming from our funding, which is for instruction. And so to the credit of the Neighborhood Community Services team, they said, okay, we understand, and let's get our legal stuff together and our liability things and security. And so they're working that out. So I'm hopeful that that trend can continue with a whole host of other things, because otherwise it's a lot of, I think, past disappointments, and we're moving away from that. We're moving to doing things better. We're being tighter and more efficient. So our next meeting, I think, is not until December. So lots of time for the staff to work together and for us to continue developing. But yeah, it was a really wonderful start. It was, we have to do things differently. It's not that it was bad or wrong. It's just that we are in a different economic reality. So let's figure out the best way to go forward. And Mr. McDaniel, anything you want to add?
No, I think that was it. I mean, it's very, what was that? Oh, yeah, it was a very productive conversation with the Board of Supervisors, the two representatives there. And the next meeting is December 11th of this year, so looking forward.
Also the same day as CPDC, so I guess this is a
This is a
theme.
trend, okay. Okay,
Right.
this is a trend, it's just facilities all day long. Yes, December 11th of 2025 is the next meeting of this committee. So, any questions, anything? Okay. With,
And we will send the materials to the board, but they are also posted online for the public, so yeah.
gotcha, perfect, okay. With that, our next CPDC meeting is on December 11th, 2025, begins at 7 o'clock here at Gatehouse Administration Center, room 1600. The Fairfax County School Board Comprehensive Planning and Development Committee meeting is adjourned as of 5:45 PM. Thank you.